Perfect. Thank you all. Thank you all for taking the time to be here. We are always excited to talk to everybody about home preparedness. It's one of the areas that my office specifically, the Crisis Management Preparedness Division of UKPD, is always really passionate about. So I'm Sarah Fink. I'm the Crisis Management and Resilience Advisor here at UK. One of our primary roles is to make sure that we work with university as well as local and state partners to prepare the university in the event of an incident or disaster. So we work with a variety of partners on campus to make sure that we can respond to, prepare, and mitigate all of the impacts that could come from incidents or disasters. So today we're going to take a few of those skills and the lessons that we've learned and provide some guidance on how you all can better prepare your homes and families. So with that, a few things that we'll talk about today is what we call the whole community approach to preparedness. We're going to talk about the types of disasters that you all may face and some of the ways that you can prepare for them and plan for your community, your home, and your family. So it's important for us to say here that this is not geared towards Fayette County. So this is one thing that we look at providing you the tools that you can take to wherever you may live or work or commute to based on the variety of different roles and responsibilities we have at the university. So we know that we have employees that may be remote, as well as those that work on main campus or in other sites. So it's important for us to provide those tools for you to then look at your community and your home specifically and be able to adjust your planning and build a plan based on your situation. So when we look at the community approach to planning, one of the important things for us is to adjust our planning to the different types of communities and the different unique interests that may be represented in those communities. So one of the goals is to make sure that we prioritize lessening the impact of disasters. So we all know that disasters are going to strike. There may be incidents that occur, but understanding how we can better prepare can help lessen the impact of those when they do happen. Additionally, we want to make sure that we're taking into consideration the unique needs of your community. So this can be both the community that you have outside of your household, as well as your family members and the unique needs within your household. And we're going to talk about a few of what those needs and what the community aspects and how they can impact your emergency planning. And then lastly, one of the key roles for our office specifically is looking at how we can better bring together community resources. So one of the areas that we focus on is working with local, state, and federal partners to bring together resources so that we can better respond and be aware of what's available to us and to our employees, faculty, and staff when we're responding to an emergency. So as we look at emergency management as a whole, there's a few layers that we look at. The first, of course, is the government aspect that provides the policy and regulatory background. So in our world, the Stafford Act is one of the primary policy backgrounds that provides the outline for how communities can get federal funding to recover from emergencies. We also think of things like OSHA, the Occupational Safety Administration, some of their regulations for how employees can better be protected and how we can provide a safe working atmosphere, as well as EPA regulations on environmental protection regulations and actions that we may need to consider when we're recovering from a disaster. So additionally, the government also provides some guidance on how to develop, test, and refine emergency plans. So we look at a few things here, like the Presidential Policy Directive number 8. So this, in our world, just created the general outline and preparedness guidance that the federal government gives to entities that are looking to prepare for emergencies. So it is the Presidential Policy Directive that identifies how can we build a resilient nation across all levels for local, state, and federal. And additionally, this also outlines something called the National Incident Management System and the Incident Command Structure. So these are two primary systems that a lot of your first responders at any level of government are going to focus on to ensure that they all know how to talk to each other, how to work together, and how to respond to emergencies at the same capacity. And then lastly, of course, the one that I think we're all most familiar with is that the government provides emergency services to protect citizens and property. So when you're looking at either the federal, state, or local level, this can be anything from the federal level with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, as well as the state level with state emergency management offices. We have one here in Kentucky, Kentucky Emergency Management, as well as entities like state law enforcement, like the state troopers. And then, of course, the local level that we have are police, fire, and EMS that we're all used to seeing. Additionally, when we look at a smaller level of what is to be considered, but probably one of the most important, is the community leaders that are involved in planning. So these leaders often voice the unique needs of the community that they represent, and it's vital that they participate in local planning. So without having the community leaders represented, We don't know the specific needs of community members, the specific challenges that some individuals may face in the community, and we also don't know a collection of resources that may be available. During disaster recovery, you'll find that a lot of the recovery resources can include things like the Red Cross, like local disaster response entities, and a lot of volunteer organizations. For us, it's important to make sure that we understand how those resources are presented in the community and build a connection with those resources prior to a disaster occurring. And then lastly, of course, the reason why we're all here is the individual level of preparedness. So this is where we can really focus on the specific needs of your family and your household to understand what priorities you may have and what considerations you may have when you're looking at how to prepare your home and your family for a disaster. Specifically, this looks at how many trainings can you take, what trainings are important to look at to prepare yourself and be the best use of your time and resources, as well as how you can take in the considerations that you learned today to put together a plan for your family. So building a little bit of the foundation of how we operate is that we run with the principle that disasters can strike anytime, anywhere, and without warning. So it's important to us to classify disasters into 3 different categories. So we identify them as either natural, technological and accidental, or human and man-made. So when we look at natural disasters, these are the ones that we see in the Weather Channel. They're the ones that we get the National Weather Service alerts for, and they're the ones that often come with some level of warning so that we can be prepared for them. They may not always come with a warning, and the warning may also not be 100% accurate. So if you see looking at the pictures below, these are from some of the impacts that Hurricane Helene had in North Carolina. So this hurricane impacted what goes above and beyond what we call the 100-year floodplain. So that is what is considered to be the worst level of flooding that we can predict based on weather patterns and climate patterns from the last 100 years. So when we look at the flooding impact that this had in the Carolinas, we can see that it was a significant devastation. I think the latest numbers have been that there's been around 90 individuals just in the Carolinas that were pronounced dead or missing, and the search is still ongoing. And we still have responders out in the field looking for these individuals and helping up the damages. And it's expected right now that the anticipated damages go over $150 billion based on infrastructure and the devastation that occurred. So we know that this hurricane impacted the Carolinas at a level that they could not predict. They had the weather alerts. A lot of them had weather notification and knew that the storm was coming for many days. The problem is just this was not something that was normal for this community or this area, and the impacts of a tropical storm coming in at this rate, at this speed, in some areas receiving over 30 inches of rainfall within a very short period of time, devastated the communities. So when we look at natural disasters, that's some of the considerations that we look at is what warnings are available, what is the typical climate atmosphere, and what is the typical severe weather outlook for your area, and how can you best prepare for those features. When we think through technological and accidental, these are disasters that impact a system that's designed to function in a specific manner. These can be things like refineries, trains, sewer systems, technological systems that are designed to get a product from one location to another or create something as a new product. So these systems often have failures that are at a small level that are mitigated and planned against at any of the refineries or systems that are affected by them. But occasionally these do become disasters based on the size and scale. So when we look at a few instances below, the picture on the bottom right is the biolab chemical fire that happened outside of Atlanta, Georgia in 2024 this year in September. So initial reports had that the chemical smell from this fire occurred and was reported from 25 miles outside of the incident site. So if you're someone that lives around refineries or chemical plants, this is something that we consider in planning, and it's something that's important to know about your community resources that are around you. And then additionally, I think most people will recognize this picture from the news, but this is from the 2023 February East Palestine, Ohio train derailment. So currently, the impact to this is still ongoing. There's still legal suits and payouts that are occurring as of today from this train derailment. So these technological and accidental impacts can have both impacts to your family based on where you're located and the hazardous materials that are around you, as well as long-term impacts on a community because of the systems that they may impact. So of course, there's a significant supply chain impact by a train derailment with the lines that go through that area. Or the refinery may have significant products that it needs to release that have downstream supply chain impacts. Additionally, the last one, we look at human and man-made disasters. So these are the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, or what we call CBRN attacks and terrorist attacks that can occur across the nation and across the world. So of course, when we look at a few of these, they're the worst case scenarios that we want to think through when we think through events that our families or friends may attend. But it's important to take the planning that you provide at your household level and talk through how would that change if you go to a public venue? How does that change if you go outside of your house? That preparedness mindset is important to take with you, regardless of whether or not you're looking at your home preparedness or just preparedness and situational awareness in general. So of course, the bottom right picture is from the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013. This was a terrorist attack where 2 pressure cooker bombs was used. And the picture on the right is from the National Guard Civil Support Team training. So the National Guard, as well as a collection of other entities at the federal level, have specific teams designed to respond to these types of disasters. One example that is provided in this picture is mass decontamination and some of the training and response tools that they use to get individuals quickly out of harm's way and secure the area from any sort of attack like this. So as we think through some of these different types of natural, technological, accidental, and then human and man-made hazards, it's important to also think about how these could affect your community. So as we go back and look at the impacts that Hurricane Helene had in the Carolinas, it's important to think about the socioeconomic and geographical factors that may be in play in your community and where you live. So some of these can include things like the income and the employment and workplace characteristics of your area, as well as the availability of public transportation, how up-to-date building codes and enforcement of these building codes are, as well as things like rivers and lakes that are local to your area, urban versus rural population density, and then of course, unique hazards to the area. So as we're working through the presentation, start to think about some of the hazards that could impact your community. Do you live in an isolated area? Do you live in a populated downtown area? And start to think about how that may play out as we talk through some of the planning considerations that you can take into place for your household planning. So as we're looking specifically at Fayette County, I want to provide a tool that anyone can adjust for their specific location on where they reside. So one tool that's available to everyone free of charge and online, and we'll provide the resource and the recording as we send it out, is the FEMA's Resilience Analysis and Planning tool. So this tool gives you the ability to type in a location and be able to see what the federal government has identified as your risk level. And you can narrow this down based on whether or not you're concerned about flooding or severe weather or sinkholes. It also gives you the ability to look at different factors like population, income levels, and how that affects building codes and enforcement. So there's a lot of information in this tool, and it's a really vital tool to starting the planning process if you aren't aware of what hazards may be in your area. So again, we'll provide this in the recording, but you can quickly access the link and it is free of charge. All you have to do is type in your location or the general area, and it will give you a color-coded map of some different features that may impact where you're living. So it's a great starting point as we start to talk through what planning considerations you may need to look at for your family. So when we look at your home, of course, the first thing we're going to look at is your home disaster ready? So before we start to look at supplies or individual backpacks or containers you need to put together, the first thing to look at is your home up to building code? Do you have old or damaged gas lines or water lines? Is there outdated or non-compliant electrical systems or faulty wiring? And what is the flooding potential of your home? So some of these factors are out of our control, but it's important that we're aware of what the risk levels are with our home and with the buildings that we reside in, just to make sure that we know what we may need to prepare a little bit more for and what we're okay with knowing that, hey, our home may be ready to weather some of the severe storms. Additionally, one of the factors that you can look at when you're looking at your home is the location. If you live on a one-way street, you may only have one evacuation route out of your house. If you have a front yard and a backyard, but your backyard has a stream in it, then flooding may impact your backyard route to get out of your house. So we're going to continue to talk a little bit more about how to develop these protective action plans and your evacuation route, but it's important consideration when you're looking at your home as to how can you best think through some of these factors and what will they look like when you're planning for emergency and disaster response. Now, one of the top questions that we always get is how can you better prepare your family? So we like to say that this has to be in coordination with looking at your community and your house, because you may prepare for your family to be on vacation and take some different disaster supplies to a vacation at the beach than you would have at home. So it's important to first set the foundation of what are those hazards in your community, what is the atmosphere like at your house, and what are the building codes and compliance and regulation of your house, and then look at the specific hazards and challenges that may face your family. So one of the first steps is, of course, to look at size and dynamics. For us, we always look at the size of the family. Is it you and a dog? Is it you and your kids? Do you have a large family, a small family? And additionally, is there any additional considerations that may need to go into that, like having elderly family members that may need additional support, or having those with disabilities that may need additional support in a time of crisis? So when we look at some of the size and dynamics, two of the key points that we ask everybody to look through is the medication needs of your family. So when you're looking at medication needs, it may need to be considerations for how quickly can you get medications refilled? Is there medications that have a shelf life or need a cooling temperature? And we'll start to talk a little bit more about that in family disaster supplies and specifically what you should plan for. But being aware of your medication needs in your family is a vital role in preparing. Additionally, being aware of any disabilities or additional support. There are a lot of resources that we'll include with the recording provided by the federal government and the CDC on how to best prepare disaster planning for your loved ones or your family members that may have disabilities or need additional support. One of the areas that's also a great resource is your local fire department. A lot of the times local fire departments will provide a way to provide additional documentation or signage in your windows if there may be someone that needs some additional support in your household. And this helps them to identify if they respond to your household, hey, there's an individual here that we may need to keep in mind as we're responding to the incident. And then additionally, considering early alert methods and communications methods available to your family. So I know that looking at generations, I don't communicate with my grandparents the same way that I do with my parents or with my sister. This is an important thing to think through when you're talking about how you're going to communicate with your family in a time of crisis. Is there certain early alerting methods that you may receive, like National Weather Service alerts or alerts from UK, that your family members don't receive? And if there is, then how would you communicate that information out? And what's the quickest way that you would be able to update your loved ones? So I know that if I'm sending an emergency alert to my parents, I'm not going to send it via email because they're going to check a text message quicker. But if I'm sending something to my grandparents, an email is going to be the best route. So looking at the communication methods that your family relies on most frequently is a vital piece of your emergency planning. Now we're going to look at how we put all these pieces together to actually build a plan. So once you've considered your community and the hazards that it faces, your home and the characteristics of your home, as well as your family and the size and dynamics that may be at play, you can start to think through some of the supply needs, planning needs, and protective actions that your family may need to take to be better prepared. So the first one we're going to look at is, of course, the family disaster supplies. So the federal government recommends 1 gallon of water per person per day for at least 3 days. And it's important to keep in mind that when you're looking at bottled or gallon water, this can expire. So a lot of people think this is a one-time purchase, but it may be something that you have to continue to check up on and make sure that it's still within its expiration date. The expiration dates are usually within years. So it may be something where if you purchase all of your supplies at one time, you can go through and check everything every couple of years. With that is also the recommendation to have at least 3 days of non-perishable food per person. So when we look at some of the situations like Hurricane Helene in the Carolinas, you can see that a lot of these individuals were stranded at their households without the ability for first responders to get to them for longer than 3 days. So when you look at the considerations for your community and your household, considering whether or not you have significant flood potential or whether or not you have significant risk of being stranded in an isolated area based on your neighborhood and where you're located, it's important to think through that when you're planning for the time frame. So while the 3 days is the guideline that we generally provide, it's important to also know that depending on where you're at, you may need to expand that time frame to consider how long it may take for first responders to get to you. Additionally, as we talked about earlier, there's the consideration of medications. So when you're looking at medications, having a catalog of what medications belong to what family members and what specific shelf life or cooling or heating may be needed for these medications. So if you have medications that have to be kept cold, then you may want to consider including a cooler in your family disaster supplies. If you have medications that need to be kept at room temperature and it's wintertime, you may want to look at a warming sleeve to have for these medications. And your doctor's office and your family practitioner are going to be some great resources to talk through what the shelf life and medication resources that you have available are. They'll also be able to provide some information on some of the best practices on how you can better refill those medications if you're going into severe winter weather or a period where there may be a need to refill a little bit more frequently than you typically do. Additionally, an important family member that we can't forget is our pets. So we always look at pet and food supplies and make sure that you're accounting for your pets in the account for water and food for day. So it's normal that we typically account for the dog food or the cat food or the other pet food in our disaster planning, but it's also important to remember that we need to add additional water based on your pet's needs. So this may be something that you typically look at: how many times do you refill your dog or cat's water bowl in a day, and use that as a rough guidance for what additional water you would need to keep for your pets. Emergency supplies and first aid is probably the broadest category. I want to stress here that when you're putting together an emergency first aid kit, or if you start researching after this presentation, you're going to see a lot of ads for very expensive kits that may have top of the line equipment. You can also go find some of this equipment at the dollar store. So when you look at this kit that is featured in the slide, you'll see that a lot of these supplies are things that you can find at replacements or additional options to add to your kit at the dollar store for a lower cost. Your emergency kit does not need to be the most fancy thing that you can find. It needs to be functional and have the needs that your family needs to have inside of it. One important note for us is that if these items are scattered across your house and they're available in one junk drawer on one floor and in a closet on the second floor, for us, that doesn't count as an emergency kit. It's important to make sure that you keep your emergency supplies together in one container and available for quick access when you are in the event of an emergency. Additionally, as you think through some storing options for where you keep your emergency supplies, making sure that you look at areas of your house that may be less likely to be impacted by an emergency. So if you have a flooding potential in your basement, maybe don't keep your emergency supplies in your basement. And then, of course, for a specific list, and we'll include it in the recording, is the ready.gov emergency supply list. So this gives a starting point where you can start to think through different categories of supplies, medication, first aid equipment that may be necessary for your family, and a quick and ready to use PDF that's free of charge for you to start the planning process. While we look at family disaster plans, this is when we start to put the pieces together of all of the factors that we've considered, from supplies available to your community impact, your household needs, and your family dynamics. So when you look at some family disaster plans, a few questions to start out with are: where will your family meet if you need to evacuate? We advise that it's usually good to have one local location, meaning right outside of your house. In the event of a home fire, it's good to have an area that you can rally right outside of the area of the impact of the fire, and then one outside of the neighborhood. Now, when you're thinking through where these locations may be, this is also something to consider: the size and dynamics of your family. So you may have young children that are not able to walk for miles to get to the local gas station to be able to meet up there. You may have older children that have access to a vehicle. In some disasters, your vehicle may be available, and some it may not. So having a few options that you communicate with your family on some rally points that are outside of your neighborhood is a good starting point. And then additionally, looking at what are your escape options available in the house. So one thing to look at and consider is, if you have a second-story home, do you have some fire escape ladders available in the event that a fire blocks your downstairs entry and you need to go out through a window? There's a lot of videos and online resources for looking at options for multi-story buildings on how you can better prepare yourself and prepare your children to get out in the event of a house fire. And then lastly, of course, one good starting point is: who is your out-of-state check-in contact? So this is something that we saw occur again a lot with the impacts of the hurricane in the Carolinas, is when cell phone service went down and individuals were trying to check in with family locally, it was difficult to get in contact with them. Now, of course, there may be impacts where your cell phone coverage goes down and you can't get a call out to anyone. But in the event that you provide one person as an out-of-state contact and that person is removed from the impact of the disaster, it's much easier for everyone in your family to call out and try to communicate with that one family member then to also check in with those that are currently being impacted. And I want to stress here that this is also something you can do with your friends. This is not just something that has to be prepared for in your family and your household. If you're someone that may live alone, then making sure that you have a friend check-in or an out-of-state contact that you can check in with in the event of a disaster is also a great starting point for your emergency planning. So when we look through emergency planning, we break them into 3 categories. So these are called our protective action plans, and they include the plans on evacuation. How do you get away from the danger? Shelter in place. How do you stay inside to get away from the danger? And then secure in place or run, hide, fight to protect yourself. So these may be allotted for different types of emergencies. For example, you may evacuate from a home fire, but you may shelter in place from a severe weather situation. And then additionally, if you have a home intruder or a threat that's occurred, you may want to look at a shelter in place, a secure in place or run, hide, fight approach. So the 2 caveats with the secure in place and the run, hide, fight is that when you're looking at secure in place, it may be more appropriate based on the age, background, and family dynamics of your home. So secure in place means exactly that, is that you are determining the best way to encourage your family and your children to stay in their rooms, to lock the doors, to hide underneath the bed in the event of a worst case scenario. Additionally, the run, hide, fight method is what the Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Bureau of Investigation recommend for things like public venues. So when you're out and about, having the situational awareness of knowing that, hey, if something does occur here, I'm aware and I know that if I can get away from the danger, I'm going to run. If I can't get away from it, I'm going to hide from it. And if at last resort, I have to fight, then I'm going to fight with whatever resources I have available to me. So those are kind of 3 broad categories that you may look at when you're starting to put together your emergency planning is how will you get out of the house? What resources do you need to stay in the house? And then what are additional trainings or awareness that you can have to protect your family both inside the house and out of the house? And of course, there are a ton of resources online with great videos to train and to talk through, especially if you have young children, on how to prepare them for run, hide, fight, or how to communicate evacuation and shelter in place. One drill that we like to encourage individuals with young kids and those that are moving to new places frequently that may be renters and have to look at different apartments is when you get to a new location or when you start to build out this emergency plan, sit down with your family or sit down one evening and go through, can I navigate my house in the dark? So one feature of many disasters that people don't think about is when the power goes out and they can't find their flashlight and they can't find a candle and their phone is inevitably dead. Can they navigate how to get out of their house without any lights on? And while I'm not going to encourage you to go around and walk through your house in the dark, it's important to think through what lights may be coming in from the moonlight, from battery-powered systems that you have in your house, and just take a minute to walk around and look at that with a flashlight or with a headlamp on and determine what does that look like in the event of a disaster so that when it occurs or if it occurs, you're able and better prepared for what that looks like and you're not caught off guard. So a few of these considerations are again outlined in the resources that we'll provide following the presentation. But of course, the ready.gov is the Federal Emergency Management Agency's approach to making a plan. This resource in general has a ton of guidance and checklists that you can use as a starting point. They're all free to use PDFs that are printable, as well as, of course, if you're local to University of Kentucky, we have the Emergency Response Guide webpage that provides some general outlines for what to do in the event of different types of incidents or disasters, as well as some methods to sign up for UK Alert. So we like to encourage everyone that may already receive the UK alerts via email to go on and sign up for a text message. UK alerts are sent out in the event of an immediate danger or disaster that's approaching on campus. So it's important for us to ensure that while you may not be checking your email, you may get a text message and that may give you that additional early alerting that we talked about earlier. Another resource that's available for those in Fayette County is the Lexington Fire Department Citizens Fire Academy. So when we talk through some of these considerations for those responding to home fires or that may have second-story houses and have to consider how to evacuate, Lexington's Department Citizens Fire Academy is free to all Fayette County residents. There is a link to sign up that we'll send out with the recording, and they provide great resources on some general first aid, some general fire awareness, and then some resources that individuals can use in their house to be aware of the hazardous materials that they may have at home. And then lastly, of course, is two links to consider for anybody that may have those with disabilities or that may need additional support in the event of an emergency. So the CDC provides some guidance on looking at medication and time frame in which you can get additional refills, as well as ready.gov provides some additional practical planning on how to include those that may need additional support in your planning and to make sure that they have the supplies that they may need and some additional considerations to make sure that you know how to best prepare for your family dynamics. And then lastly, I'll provide the shout out that if you all need some additional help or guidance on resources, our office is happy to help, and you can reach out to me at sarah.fink@uky.edu. But with that, I know I threw a lot of information at you very quickly, but the important part of this is that we can talk through any questions that you all have. So I'm happy to open up the chat and let's see what questions we have. So it looks like we will definitely share the links in the recording. So all of the resources that you saw on here will be available following the presentation. We also, there's a comment in here talking about living at the end of a dead-end street. That's something that we really encourage, is that when you're looking at your home preparedness, look at the ways in which you may need to get out. So if you live in a cul-de-sac or if you live in a dead-end street, you may have to think through what some other options are if you have to leave on foot outside of a different door, or if you have to make sure that that pathway is cleared for emergency responders responding to an incident at your home. You may not be able to get out of your primary route. Additionally, it looks like we have some people that may live by factories. This is a really important point, is that if you live in Fayette County or whatever county you have, there are also resources available from your local LEPC. So that is your local emergency planning committee. These individuals are required to document and maintain records of the hazardous materials that are located around your community. And they'll also be able to provide some home preparedness guidance and some kits that are available. So our local LEPC has a website that is run by Lexington Emergency Management that provides some information on how you can document any hazardous materials that may be local to you and also see some of the hazardous materials that may be around your house. So it's a really good resource if you live near any chemical factories or chemical or refinery plants. If you have elderly parents or loved ones, yes, this is also a really good point, is to make sure that you talk through with them what their medications may be and how those medications may need to be stored. And also make sure that you do that well before the time that you have to be prepared for it. So one of our running comments is that if we are making relationships with individuals in the community, or if we are talking through our preparedness plans when the disaster strikes, it's no longer a preparedness plan, it's a response plan. So making sure that you sit down ahead of time with your loved ones and with your family members to talk through some of these needs and kind of have the time and the peace of mind to think through and question what that may look like for you. Another great point is that thinking through some of your disaster supplies may give you a good checklist when you travel. So like we mentioned, is talking through, if you're going on vacation, you may prep for your vacation a little bit differently than you prep for preparedness at home. I automatically take a first aid kit with me anytime I go anywhere, but I know now that if I go to the beach, I'm immediately going to add some more aloe and Benadryl cream because inevitably I'm going to get sunburned. So that's one of the factors of the community that I'm traveling to that I know will change how I prepare for that. Yes, absolutely. If you have pets, make sure that you have collar, leash, crates, anything like that that will make it easier to evacuate with them. Also be really mindful if you have animals that are scared of storms. So I have a dog that is terrified of storms, and I know the locations in the house that he's likely to hide in, but I'm one of the only ones that knows that. So making sure that you communicate that information or you provide it to other loved ones that may be helping you evacuate or maybe local to your house is important, as if you have pets that have specific characteristics during thunder, lightning, severe weather, documenting that and communicating that to your loved ones is important. Does anybody else have any questions?
If you guys have any questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question, making sure your video is off. or you can type it in the chat. Sarah, I love listening to all of this advice, and I kept picking up all of these nuggets. Like even the advice you gave about just testing walking through your house in the dark. Just like, can you do it? I mean, and there's some other great reminders too that I heard, such as having a contact outside of the state, outside of your area, having a space not only in your neighborhood to meet up, but outside of if it's down the street at the whatever. I had never even thought of that. I've always thought about just like my neighbor three doors down kind of a thing. But so that's a really good. And there were lots of other nuggets that I kind of took away going, oh my gosh, I hadn't thought of that. So thank you for sharing.
Happy to. And again, these all links have some great resources that you can really dig into. They're all free to use. The one good thing about emergency planning is 90% of the resources that you're going to find are free to use and printable for you. And you can start off at the ready.gov, make a plan site, and just print off the available PDFs. And that will give you a great head start on your planning.
Sarah, this is Catherine Wong, and I have a question for you. So I normally keep I used to have sort of like a duffel bag
Mhm.
where I would have my emergency things in, and then I know I could always pull it out when I know that, if there's a tornado or a storm watch, whatever it is, and I have it in the hallway so I can pick it up. But then I also realize increasingly that we probably need um, some additional things, whether it's the water or
Mhm.
food and things like that. And so now I've been considering putting those portable Rubbermaid containers
Mhm.
because the duffel bag risks getting wet. And the hard case, at least I know, will not get wet.
Yes.
So I'm going to try that out because I know it might be bulky when you're trying to move out compared to a bag where you can just pick out. But then every time I think about it, I feel like that's going to be pretty helpful having a hard case and then a soft case.
Yes. So one of the methods that I use, and again, it depends on the dynamic of your family, is I have in the location where I shelter for storms, is I have a Rubbermaid container that has the heavier supplies. So I keep that in the lowest level of the floor where I go for any like tornado warnings. And then I also have on top of that a kind of go bag that has maybe like 1 gallon of water, but some snacks, some change of clothes, some immediate supplies to get. Because I typically run with the assumption that because I live in an urban area, if I evacuate, I'm going to have resources available around me to pick up additional. That's a risk that I run with my own planning, is knowing that I'm not going to take that full box with me, but also knowing that I have the box available both if I need a shelter in place or evacuate. So I would recommend kind of having a twofold approach.
And then I was just going to comment also about your advice, which I thought was really good about doing the walkthrough in the dark so that you're at least familiar with your path. But I was also going to say that those with pets, to be extra careful because when you're doing your walkthrough and it's not an emergency, your animal companion is going to act differently from when something is
Yes.
going down. And you got to watch that you're not tripping and falling over them. And once again, that was an example from a friend of mine who did fall over her dog and then broke her wrist. So there you have an evacuation thing. And then now you've broken your wrist and you're trying to get your dog, to someplace safe along with the rest of your family.
Absolutely. It's a great story and I appreciate you sharing it just from everybody can understand that lesson of anytime you've tried to walk with a dog, if the dog is riled up, we all know that it's a tripping hazard for any of us. But it's also a good point along the lines of I tend to try to get, especially if I'm watching other people's animals, if there's a storm coming through, I'll watch the behavior of the animal. So most of us know how our pets behave, but also understanding that if you're at a heightened sense and you're trying to respond to something, your dog may act differently than they normally would anyway. So being aware of just kind of those reactions and prioritizing your personal safety first is a big point of it. So. Oh, there is an idea in the chat about having the hard plastic case with wheels. That's a really good one, depending on your availability and kind of if you have capacity in a car to get that out to it. Having the hard plastic cases with wheels can give you an additional option to kind of have a go bag and a Rubbermaid in the same design. So,
Are there any additional questions? I also really appreciated the comment about, just being aware of your neighborhood and if
mhm.
one way is blocked, like what's your alternate route? And if you're in a space that there's only one way in to that neighborhood or to your home, that's just really good to think about and consider some alternatives.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's important. A lot of the times people go and look at Google Maps and start as that as their analysis of their community is you find your house on Google Maps, you look at the satellite image, and then you start to look at some of the areas that may impact you, like streams or water or one way in and out of your residence. So that's a good starting point if you haven't pulled up your house on Google Maps lately.
All right. I don't see any additional questions. Thank you, Sarah. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate you taking time to educate us and in some cases remind us of some things that we need to be aware of and how we can plan and make sure that we are prepared for any type of emergency. So thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you all for taking the time and prioritizing helping to prepare your family.